so much for putting aside the time to join us today and to, so we can learn for what you have been doing on farm. So would you like to introduce yourselves and a little bit about the history of the farm and, what it's like today?
Yep, thanks, Catherine. Brent here. First correction is we're Upper South Island, not Upper North Island.
Oops.
We're a long-term dairy farming family. We've been here for 100 years now. So I'm third generation and Hamish is fourth. We were a traditional mixed farm back in the old days where we had some sheep and pigs and ran deer for a while, but we've always milked cows. And since I came on board in 71, 72, I only wanted to focus on cows, and so progressively got rid of the sheep and the deer. And we're now 100% cows and forestry.
And I came back to help out Dad on the farm in 2016, starting back just helping with office work for a start, and then moving full-time onto the farm, going from lower levels on the farm up to contract milking, and now 50-50 share milking. Bought the cows about a year ago.
That's great. I might even, at this point, just share some of the photos from when I was able to visit. I'll just take a moment to come on. And yes, it's very much Upper South Island, not Upper North Island. Now it's just coming through. Excellent. I think you can see this. So so you can see what the landscape's like there in the Rye Valley. Very beautiful. It's a lovely sunset as well. I'll just stop presenting and go back to a little bit more about your story. So in terms of trees, what value did you see in them? Like, what was your reason for working with trees on farm and establishing trees on farm?
Back in the 60s, Dad got into pine forestry in the very early days of farm forestry. And so we had some really rugged hill country in pine trees back then. But when I came on board and got my own piece of land in 81, I really wanted to experiment with beautification. And so experimented with a lot of different types of trees, just in small plots really, and concentrated on, it was on a block that was a development block, and it had some pretty rugged little banks that were infested with quite a bit of gorse, and I deemed that it wasn't practical to try and keep it in pasture, so fenced off small areas. There might have only been an acre or two here and there, and planted a variety of trees, Lusitanicas and gums mostly initially, and that sort of kicked it off.
That's great. In terms of the benefits from when you started planting, what were some of the things that you noticed, and was it different, Brent, to what you expected? Were there some unexpected pluses as well?
Yeah, well, it was. I guess maybe I might not have even thought of the beautification as much the day that I planted them, but it soon became apparent, once the trees got 5 or 6 years old, that it was pretty nice to have some different colours and different areas. And that's where really the beautification idea took off quite a bit, as well as improving the shapes of paddocks. And that first piece of land was a runoff, and so we wanted mowable paddocks, but if we couldn't mow them, well, trees lent a really good option to awkward corners and steep pieces that we couldn't mow. So that's really what sort of set me going, really.
Makes sense. And what about for yourself, Hamish, in terms of the pluses? And of course, we're going to talk about the downsides as well, but just a little bit more to focus on some of the benefits. What have you observed? Or
I guess I came in more the later stages of Dad had done quite a bit by the time I come back to the farm, but we've just carried on with riparian planting afterward, already fenced off waterways and that sort of thing. And yeah, just planted a lot of flaxes and natives, which is now creating a lot more shade around for the waterways and a lot more bird life as well, lots of tuis and that sort of thing.
I know we're going to be talking about the livestock later on in terms of some of the pictures. Can you talk a little bit there, though, in terms of benefits, livestock benefits, even just briefly, and we can drill down later?
Well, one of the biggest thing is, like I took out on the home farm where we are here, just taking out the steep hills that used to run sheep, because if we ran cattle on them, that was just going to create cattle tracks and sediment erosion and things like that. So that was an initial idea, and we used to, the steep hills, we used to have to fertilize them with a plane. So by putting them into forestry meant that we could use the plane less and get over the easier country with a tractor or a fertilizer truck. So yeah, just really moving the stock off the land that shouldn't be on, really.
Yeah. And then for some of the downsides, what have been when things have gone wrong or there's been extra work? What stood out to you there?
The biggest issue really on a working farm is that it's a great idea to plant trees, but actually planting the trees is the easy bit. The big battle is the next 3 years, keeping the weeds out around them. And of course, you've got maximum growth in the spring when you're busy with calving and everything that's going on the farm. And it's really, really difficult to keep on top of the weeds and look after the trees at that time for those first 3 years, which is critical. So we had a few failures by just not being able to keep up. So you either had to keep the area small or you just need to get someone in to help. Otherwise, you're not going to win.
Yeah. Do you get some people in sometimes? Like, is it just locals to help and pay them, or how's that work?
Yeah. We've actually got contractors here today, just going along the riverbank where we've planted. We've done some replanting of some young flax, and they're just going through there with a brush cutter and then following up with some spray just to release around the flaxes down by the river right now. And that's the best way to go, is just to get someone in and get it done so that it doesn't get there's only a matter of weeks or months between success and failure, really, when the plants are small.
What are the main sort of weeds that you have to deal with in your area?
Well, actually, the worst weed is grass. It's particularly bad when, like Hamish said, in the last 5 years, we've done a lot of native planting, and of course, your natives are pretty slow growing, and they blend in more than what a deciduous tree does. And so grass is actually the worst thing, because in no time it'll smother them. And because it's so fast growing, if you're dealing with gorse or broom, well, they're a lot slower growing, so you can actually sort of, although they're nasty weeds, they're actually easier to keep on top of than what the grass is.
What about pests too? Do you have issues there with coming out of the nearby bush? Or?
Yeah, not too much. I mean, we do have a few deer around, and we did have one small native plot that we planted a few years ago, and it was sort of a little bit out of sight, out of mind. And we checked up a few months later, and there was nothing left. The deer had come in and eaten the lot, but that doesn't happen very often. Hares can be quite difficult as well. We have a few hares around, and they'll bite a tree trunk off halfway up the tree, like just at their their height, and not ideal, but that's not a major issue.
Right. What about tree fall with windstorms? I feel for the farmers down south of what's happened there.
Yeah, I mean, you live with that risk the whole time. It's just matter of keeping your fingers crossed, really, and hoping for the best. We actually had a pretty severe windstorm here only about 3 weeks ago, and fortunately it didn't do much damage, but it has taken out individual trees, not only in the forest, but around my house and that as well. But in the forest, it was extremely gusty and very localized, so it snapped a few trees off halfway up, of all ages. But luckily, it didn't actually do any major wind blow, so it was a pretty close call. Probably the worst event I've had so far with wind.
Well, that's good. That hasn't been, yes, too extreme. And in terms of establishing and managing the plantings, can you talk us through there what you've learned and some tips? It's really you've talked through the weeds and the pests, and particularly the grass. That's a great take home. But anything else that you'd think would be useful for people to know around establishing them and their ongoing management?
Well, yeah, of course, another one is to actually have your area fenced off first. I was guilty in the early days of banging a few trees in a corner somewhere and putting a temporary electric fence up, and that would be there for, quite some time until you got around to it. But inevitably, occasionally the stock would get through and eat some trees or whatever. So fencing first is a good policy, and also sometimes blanket spraying as well, before you even plant, just to clear the site and get you off to a good start.
And do you ever
Around
have
spacing as well, and not planting too close to the fences as well? We've learned that with flaxes, they get quite big after a while, and yeah, it's not ideal for your electric fences.
have you ever been caught out with any trees and planting them too close to roading or infrastructure, and then a few decades down the track?
Not too much. Yeah, not too much. Always been reasonably aware of that. Yeah, no, it hasn't been too bad. But yeah, like Hamish said, flaxes, they look awesome, but very hard to judge how big they actually get, if you fence them off. And when they get mature, they're like 3 meters in diameter. So, and they're terrible if they happen to start touching the electric fences. They're really difficult to clear back. So you've got to be pretty careful with them.
What about once they're established? What kind of management tips have you learned over the years that could help people to make sure they get the outcomes they're wanting?
It really is just that, weed control for that first 3 years or so. I mean, once most trees are 5 or 6 years old and, get up 2 or 3 meters, it's pretty much set and forget after that. There's not really much to worry about.
And pruning with the woodlots, what about the timber?
Yeah, that's a different story, of course, to the beautification. Exactly. Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about pruning pretty much every tree that's potentially a woodlot tree. It doesn't matter whether it's Lusitanica, blackwood, redwood, or a pine tree. I always try and prune to half the height of the tree from a reasonably young age, and then just continually go up until you get to your standard 6.5 meters, which is your ideal saw log on any tree, really.
And in terms of pruning, let's say back to your plans of shade and shelter or beautification or riparian, have you found, like when you've got the vegetation right to the ground, down to the ground, what's been the impacts of shading on the pasture when you've got a denser vegetation?
Once your trees get established, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're sort of starting to think about now, looking to the future, is to create shade for the cows, because that's going to be another issue that I can see going forward as far as animal welfare goes. So, I mean, fortunately, with a lot of forestry planting we've done, just by accident, we've created shade in a lot of places, but we're now concentrating on actually planting some small plots out on our flats or anywhere on the farm, just to create some shade for the cows to shelter in when it's really hot.
I wonder at this point might go to some of these pictures we're looking at before Brent and Hamish can talk to them. But just thinking about downsides too, I know some dairy farmers are very understandably concerned about taking land out for the trees and about the negative impacts of shading on pasture growth. What's been your experience there, and what would you share with other dairy farmers that might be concerned about that?
I think the thing is to keep the shade areas not too big. Like don't plant the whole side of a paddock with, say, poplars in a big row. I mean, that'll just create too much shade, and if you create too much shade and the trees get too big, they'll actually slow down the pasture growth and damage it. And if you reduce the pasture growth, well, then it's more subject to pugging. If the cows keep on sheltering under it, it's just going to get hammered. So that's where people would have a bad experience, is when you've got, a big length of, say, poplar trees that are creating a huge amount of shade, maybe shading a quarter of a paddock. That's definitely a negative. So if you can see in that photo there, we've just planted like a 20-meter strip that's going to grow up and create, hopefully enough shade for maybe not necessarily the whole herd at one time, but for quite a percentage of them to shelter in. And of course, they'll come and lay down in the shade, and then the sun moves around and some of them end up not in the shade, but you probably find they'll just stay there anyway once they're laying down and resting.
So I've got one here of a older patch that you've planted. So can you share more with us about the design of where you've placed those little shelter belts, thinking about the practicalities of working farm? Because there's some really cool lessons here for us all.
Yeah, well, of course, it's pretty natural choice for us because we've got a lot of small streams on the farm. The topography is quite broken with small streams and deep little gullies and things. So, we've fenced them off before we planted them. And so it's just kind of been a natural progression to end up, we will end up with shade in those places simply because we've fenced off some gullies. So if you took a totally flat farm in Canterbury, well, it'd be a totally different concept as to how you'd go about it.
Hamish, any clues for us there? Because that is a gnarly one. When you've got Canterbury, particularly pivot irrigated, would you like to talk us through what you think could work for that sort of environment?
Yeah. I can certainly. It's a whole different challenge, and certainly, a big challenge, because obviously pivots are the perfect irrigation system. They're the most environmentally friendly as far as water usage goes. I guess if I was in that situation, most of those farmers tend to want every inch irrigated. So off the corners of the pivot, in the corners of the paddock, they usually put in poles and have irrigation off the top of that, or some kaolin or something, so that they do the lot. If I was in that situation, I'd be looking at leaving some of those quarters and all of those little triangles. I'd be planting trees on them. Even if it wasn't on the correct side for shade, you're going to have shade. Trees on the north are going to give you shade. Trees on the south are going to give you shelter. And I think I would, personally, I'd have a different approach, but you certainly can't blame them for, it's only pretty early development really in Canterbury, and there's a lot of roadside planting, native planting happening on those farms down there now, I notice. They're doing a lot of beautification. So I think, yeah, peer pressure and looking around, there's a lot of opportunity to improve things, in my opinion.
Thanks, Brent. Just last week was visiting Tamar Farm, owned by the Wrights. It's amazing what they are doing in terms of integrating trees on farm and really looking at options for pivot irrigation. They're near Methven. So you can see here some pictures of some of those waterways and ephemeral flow paths that Brent's been talking about. Did you want us to talk through anything else with some of those wetlands and riparian plantings, Brent, or have you shared what you've wanted there?
That photo is a good one because, as you can see here beside me there, that was a really wet area that just wasn't practical to continue trying to farm it. And then in the background, you can see that's our steppe country that used to run sheep and deer. That's where we've got mixed forest now as solid forestry in the background.
Here's another one as well, just showing some of your forestry. Just keep on flicking through. If you talk to them if you like. I'll just go through them slowly.
Yes, one of the difficult things going forward now that the forestry is getting quite mature with the production stuff is actually getting the trees out. Because Dad's sort of planted some at different ages and different species, so it's going to be quite a challenge to get them out. And then you've also got to manage that with running the dairy farm as well and doing them at the right time of year in the late summer when it's nice and dry. And yeah, obviously planting, if you're wanting to do production forestry, make sure you've got a good easy way to get that timber out as well, good access, especially
Hamish,
if you've got waterways and that sort of thing to get over as well.
Yeah. Could you talk us through your involvement with the forestry, how you run it as well as a father-son team in terms of the farm, in terms of the forestry and the planting?
My other brother Justin and I both involved in the farm. He's probably more involved with maintaining the forests, doing digger work and that sort of stuff, updating tracks and whatnot. But we just sort of try to talk ahead and plan what's going to come up for that year. Mainly it's pruning and thinning and that sort of stuff, so it's not too much impact on the dairy farm. But yeah, when we have a decent block that we need to cut down, then we need to think about regrassing paddocks, because there's often a lot of rubbish that falls down after harvesting onto the grass and that. So yeah, just planning regrassing and that sort of thing as well. Yeah.
In terms to the shade and shelter that Brent's been establishing, is that something that you see yourself carrying on, or with the way, Brent, that you're going, was that going to be finished in the next few years, or do you think of like a decade? What's the time frame there, and how do you see that working out with both of you?
I think it's just an ongoing thing. We just, you can only do so much every year. So it's just each year you pick the most obvious place to put some shade in and go from there. But yeah, probably over the next 5 or 10 years, we should definitely have most of the areas we want planted out.
Yeah. But overall, what would be your key take homes for dairy farmers? Let's say you're speaking to a dairy farm audience that's not as interested in trees as you are. What would you tell them in terms of starting off? What would be your advice to them?
To get in touch with the local Farm Forestry Association. They've got a wealth of knowledge, and they're often doing tours around each area of the country as well.
Yeah, I think in every area there's always some farmer that's a bit of a tree nut, and you know, just yeah, go and talk to someone that's doing it in your area. It'd be the best advice.
That makes sense. Look, this has been really good. Before we, oh, and thanks too, because just so folk know, we'd sort of worked out some questions to help Brent and Hamish share their story, but there was a lot there just ad-libbing and just interested with what you're sharing and trying to tease that out. So thank you for being so flexible. Just before that we open up to questions, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to cover? And then, as I said, we'll open up the floor.
Good.
No, I think that's, yeah, there's no doubt there'll be things that we haven't covered, but yeah, let's go to the questions.
Cool. So we've got some here already. Right. So Jerry's asked, have you noticed any benefits in pasture growth adjacent close to the planted areas, i.e. reduce wind speed and increase moisture retention in the adjacent pasture areas, enabling better growth?
I think for me, the simple answer would be no, because we're in a high rainfall area. We are in a valley system, so we do get some predominant winds, but we don't get hammered with wind. We're not known, we definitely won't be putting any wind farms up here because we're actually known for fog. So yeah, my thoughts would be that no, it doesn't enhance growth, but doesn't create any negative as far as that goes either.
Thanks, that's helpful. So just so you know, Brent and Hamish, if you click on that chat item at the top, you'll be able to see the questions down there. So it could mean that while one's answering, the other can be reading ahead, which will just help you in terms of thinking about the answers. Roger's asking, have you tried using egg spray for protecting young seedlings?
No.
Right. And then Jacqueline McGowan, how has your tree selection changed over time, and what have you learned about that?
I've had on and off periods. I was pretty passionate and still are about Tasmanian blackwood because it's such a beautiful, valuable timber. But I went through a period of a number of years where I didn't plant any because it's really frustrating. It's a tree that doesn't naturally grow straight. It's easily wind damaged, and they can be very frustrating getting them through the middle years. Basically from a fairly young age onwards, they can be pretty frustrating, but we've got out the other side of that now, and we're actually harvesting some, and it's just such valuable, beautiful timber that it is worth persevering with. But it's one that it's a bit like trying to grow totras. You need to be very careful with your site and do a lot of work to try and get them to grow straight.
Brent, I'm just going to throw another one in, not from the chat, but you're talking about the timber. Do you want to share your thoughts on the value chain? Again, I hear farmers saying, well, I've grown some wood, but some timber, but there's no market for it. Do you have any thoughts there on how that might pan out? Say we've got farmers growing small, specialised woodlots.
Yeah, I mean, that is a challenge, and I think it'll get better, but it does come down to, like I was just saying about blackwoods, you can't cut timber out of logs that aren't pretty straight. So you do need to look after the trees the whole way through and keep up with your pruning and silviculture to get a decent log. And I mean, we're pretty new, we haven't sold any yet. So, but I think with Trade Me and also working in with, we're using what we believe is a very good sawmiller who has a lot of contacts, and we just got some blackwood sawn up recently, and some of it actually got sold straight off the saw as soon as he's got a Facebook page or something, and put the word out there that he was sawing blackwood, and some of it was sold straight away because people wanted it. So little bit unsure of what the future holds, but it looks pretty promising, I think, for most species, really.
So that's really encouraging. So I remember when I visited how you were talking about how you're kind of working as a tag team in terms of now looking at a long-term supply. Was that the blackwood in terms of harvesting in small amounts and then the milling of it and selling
Yeah,
it?
we're thinking the same with the Lusitanica. Like we've got quite an area of Lusitanica, and up until recently, I just thought we'd treat it like a pine forest and it'd just be clear filled, when it's all at a mature age. But going to some recent field days and discussing with some other guys, I realised there is quite a potential to do what the Europeans do and keep a permanent canopy and just go in and, cut down half a dozen of the best trees at the time and get them milled and actually keep a permanent canopy by just continually thinning and growing. So that appeals. It appeals quite a bit as a thought, but practicalities might turn out to be a different thing because it might not be cost effective to be handling small amounts. Unfortunately, it might need to keep up a bit of scale and actually do clear filling.
It's not an easy one, isn't it? But it's great to see what you are doing and how that's working out. Now, Andy Cooper, would you like to talk to the next question there about the fern factor?
It wasn't so much a question as I wondered whether you'd actually thought about or been ever approached about using ferns to suppress weeds, because this is something this company sort of built their company on doing that. So what they wanted to do initially was get away from using weed matting, plastic weed matting, and using ferns, and it's been quite successful. Was it something you've ever considered?
No, Andy, I didn't know about that concept. So that's the simple answer. I mean, because we're doing most things at a bit of scale, of course, we're not using weed matting or anything. We're just having to use spray and mechanical, bit of weed mulching and that sort of thing. So didn't know that ferns was an option.
Yeah, so they've been using this on the side of new roading. So it's commercial, large scale, but might be worth having a chat with them.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
So there's a link there for anyone if they're interested. If you just go to the chat, www.fernfactor.co.nz. And if you're interested, I met a couple in the Southland, I think, that were doing that when they were establishing the trees. That was beef and sheep hill country. Now, for a really good question here from Jerry, in your experience with growing blackwood, redwood, larch, eucalyptus, and Lusitanica and rye, what have you found to be the best species for value return in the selective harvesting? Do you mill the logs yourself or send to a local processor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My preference is leaning definitely towards the blackwood, redwood, and Lusitanica. I've got some pretty mature eucalypts here, and they're beautiful trees. And apparently they are good timber trees, but nobody really wants to mill them. They're very difficult to mill. The guy that we use can definitely do it, but I think there's really not much market for it. So eucalypts, I think, are pretty difficult. But yeah, blackwood, redwood, and Lusitanicas, they do really well here, and they will suit for selective harvesting simply because we're not talking big acreages. We have no intentions of milling the logs ourselves. I mean, that's just a specialist job. It's bloody hard work. My father was a logger and a part owner of a sawmill. So I grew up knowing what that's all about, and I don't want to go down that track. I'd sooner use somebody that wants to make a career out of it. I've talked to Justin about having our own mill, and he's not interested. So yeah, that's not going to be happening at this stage.
Thank you. In terms of species that you tried that haven't worked, what hasn't worked?
I wouldn't say anything hasn't worked. It's just that I think, most of the gums, while if you go back 30 years, they looked like they were very promising and were said to be going to be good timber species, and they are. There's just no real demand for it. So that's probably the biggest failure in that sense. And as I've alluded to all the way through, the Blackwoods, very difficult to look after, but they are the most valuable of the lot when it comes down to it. So I think they're something that will definitely persist with, and we'll just gain knowledge as we go along, really, now that we're starting to mill them.
Be really good to follow through with this and see how that goes and what that's looking like 5-10 years from now. A question for Trevor. What is the plan for biomass management long term? Do you end up with burn piles that could provide biochar as an alternative to ash?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't looked at that option. What we are doing, because we're a dairy farm and we rear a lot of our calves, we've got some pretty good calf rearing facilities. We use wood chip in the bedding, 300 mils deep. So like you're talking 3 unit loads of wood chip to fill our sheds each year, and we only use it for 1 year and then we take it and dump it. So we've just recently done some pine harvesting, and we've got a guy that comes in with a big chipper, and we chip up all of the waste material and try and clear the skid site of slash by chipping it and using it in our own calf sheds. And if we've got a surplus, we just sell it for cost to the neighbours. So that's at the moment is our go-to for slash removal.
Then once it's been in the calf sheds, we're just looking at uses after that now as well. So either composting or just selling as garden bedding locally as a potential.
Yeah. It looks like we might be able to recycle it a couple of times through the calf shed and then onto some gardens or something.
That'd be great. Trevor, just saying, you have a comment. Pro Silver from Europe has landed in NNZ for long-term forester management. Is there anything you wanted to say about that, or a question for Brent and Hamish? That doesn't sound like it. Okay. So Roxanne was interested in the selective logging. Is that for some of your production forestry or for all of it?
No, will only be for some of it. I mean, we've got quite extensive pine plantation as well, which will just be clear-felled and done in the normal Kiwi way. The selective logging is only going to be in the higher grade trees.
Great, thanks. And here from Kyle Wills, great planting. Looks like you have avoided larger areas of shelter to avoid large shade patches as you discussed. Have you done the financials on whether larger areas of shelter trees greater than 1 hectare at minimum SPH would be net beneficial given the extra shade by ETS eligibility and carbon sales?
Well, yeah, basically been following the natural waterways and going from there, and we don't really want to dig into any more of the production grass, so the larger areas be quite we've already dabbled in the corners and that sort of stuff, so we really want to maintain that grass area now.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I guess. Yeah, I would just add to that 1/3 of the farm is irrigated, so of course you can't have trees scattered around that because it interferes with irrigation.
Kyle, did you want to make any comments from your work in Canterbury with dairy and the financials by way of comparison, or
Yeah,
move
it
on to
was
the next question?
absolutely acknowledge the drop in pasture production you can get from the shade. It was more just doing the net benefit calculation of that. So like how much grass you lose, how much milk solid you lose, and then compare that to the dollars you might gain on carbon. And I was more just looking at like the side of your valleys where some of those paddocks went up onto steeper faces. And if you needed a hectare for it to be ETS compliant, you got majority of that might have been up on that steep face where opportunity cost for shade is a bit lower. That is more just doing the calculation of like, yes, we're going to lose grass, but are we financially better off or worse off in that situation?
Yeah, we have got some of our forest in the ETS, so it is definitely worthwhile thinking about those areas. And if you can get an extra hectare out of it, then it's definitely worthwhile looking at that.
Yeah, especially when you've got your waterways and stuff that stretch out across the farm, and to the averaging of like it needs to be 30 meters wide on average, but if you link that up to your bigger forest area, it can be included. So a bit of an easy win there if that's not already in the case.
Yeah, definitely linking up some of those areas would be worthwhile. Yeah.
Down the track, Kyle, it'll be really interesting to do a webinar with yourself and your experience there in Ludgate and Otago. Quite different, isn't it, to
Yeah, my
the
trees are
environment here?
bit small, it's a bit drier, but one day.
But it's great what you started. Now, about flood damage. What flood damage have you experienced with your riparian plantings, for example, survival rate, undue erosion, etc.? And what would you do to mitigate such damage now?
We have got about a third of our farmers on the river flat, so we do get quite severe flooding at times. So on that area, we're basically sticking to the willows and flaxes and that sort of thing that are quite good for erosion. Poplars as well that we're using for riverbank protection. So yeah, just got to pick the right tree in the right place, really.
And so with that, then, do you get pretty good survival, Hamish?
Yeah, as long as they get in, like if they can survive for a year or two, then that's usually all right. Yeah.
Yeah. Then the next question, do you prune your shade shelter gully plantings?
Garlic plantings, pruning. Just depends on if it's production timber, then we'll be pruning it. Yeah.
The actual shade shelter trees are not generally going to be timber trees, so we wouldn't bother pruning them unless they were creating too much shade. They tend to be poplars and silver birch, which neither are, you're going to be very interested in timber.
Great, thanks. And what trees are you planting for those little areas intended to provide shade in the paddocks?
Yeah, the best one would be poplar because it's so fast growing. The ones that we've done so far have got there's some silver birch and oaks, and always a bit of flax and liquid amber as well. But of course, a lot of those are a little bit slow growing, so it's going to take a few years to get a result. So I think every plot really needs to have 2 or 3 poplars in it so that you can get as fast as possible shade.
Brent, down the track, thinking about how big poplars grow, would you consider chopping them, or would you let them grow to their full height?
No, you probably would look at chopping them, or you might plant 3, and then when they get pretty big, cut 1 or 2 down and just leave one big one for the shade.
Yeah. Then another question on the economics from Kyle. If the economies of scale on small woodlots are a pain, have you considered growing timber for your own use, such as black locust for fence posts that don't need to be treated?
No, haven't considered that. Am aware of that, but yeah, haven't considered it at this stage, Kyle.
Then we've got a question about blackwoods. Blackwoods are best planted and grown within a nurse species such as Canuka or Tree Lucerne Takasasti that are
Yep.
about 3 to 4 years old. That tends to keep them straight. But Takasasti doesn't like wet feet and can handle it quite dry. So you're growing them with a nurse species?
No, generally I haven't done because it's been, converting pasture land to forest, so I haven't had that luxury of ever having I mean, that's absolutely correct. Canuka or Manuka is fantastic to plant in, but we don't have much of that here. I don't know about the Tassie, but also blackwoods really don't like wet feet either. So yeah, they prefer just, pretty average sort of conditions.
Thanks. And then a final question. Do you put stock under the trees once they're well established?
No, we don't, because up until recently, everything's been done with an eye of production forestry. And so it's been more blocks on the steeper hills where we don't want stock anyway. We haven't really got any significant areas. Well, we haven't got any areas that are suitable for grazing under because we're fenced off, steep gullies and awkward places that you wouldn't want stock in.
There are some really old trees on farm that they're obviously not fenced off, and that they create great shade for the cows to lie under.
This has been really good. Is there any of the people who have brought for the questions, or anyone else, any more questions or anything that you would like to discuss or expand on in the questions that have been brought forward? And are there any other dairy farmers online? It'd be really interesting to hear about your experience of trees on dairy farms. And are there similar things that you found to what Brent and Hamish have spoken about, or some differences?
I've just got another wee point. Like if you're doing just like individual or small groups of trees, particularly for shade and shelter, there's potentially like the likes of honey locust or something where they can they'll be dropping seed pods over winter when you need that extra forage as an extra. There's some other trees that offer some extra little benefits to the production side of the farm, and the nitrogen fixes as well in a way. So that'd be a cool wee one to try.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kyle. I think if that's all the questions, we might wrap up. This has been great. It's been really good hearing about Mount Rimu and what you're doing there, and some really good discussions. I might just put it back to you, Brent and Hamish. Anything else you want to share, or even just to oh, here we go. If you yeah, and in a moment I'll just put it back to you, just to, if you want to just summarize the key take homes for us. But here Roger's asking, if you get a contractor to mill your trees, do you sell the logs or keep the timber to sell yourself?
Yeah, good question, Roger. We keep it. We're at this stage we're planning on bringing the timber back to the farm, and because particularly blackwood, but most timbers really need some period of drying after it's milled, and so our plan is to bring it back, put it in a hay shed, strip stacked, to dry for 6 to 12 months until the moisture level's correct, so that when you sell it, if it goes to a joiner or somebody that's buying high-end timber, it's actually ready to use and they don't have any failure with it. So our plan is to bring it all back, dry it, and then sell it ourselves.
Cool, thanks. So to wrap up, could you even share in a nutshell what you've experienced as the key benefits, some of the key downsides, and just, yeah, in a nutshell, what would you say to other farmers in terms of suggesting they do?
My biggest take home really is I'm just really satisfied with the beautification that we've created. it's never really been done for financial gain. But the more we get into it and as time goes on, I just feel really satisfied that we've fenced off streams, and in some cases we've actually moved the fences out even further a second time just to create a nice woodlot area with some colour variation that looks good, not for any actual financial gain. But if you take it to the other extreme, of course, all forestry, if it's got financial potential, which most has, particularly production forestry, you've got some options around. You don't have to harvest it this year. It's not like raising steers to send to the works and they've got to go when they get to a certain age. With trees, you've got a 3 to 5 year window where they're probably ready, but you can wait until the market's really good and then sell. Or you can sell them in a year when you're having a major drought and production's down. So I think they're the type of things that people should be thinking about.
And I'd just like to add that, with the more extreme weather events, I think having those blocks of trees and thinking about areas for shelter and shade, that's going to be really beneficial going forward as well. So that'll be our main focus from now.
Thank you. And to a farmer starting out scratch that doesn't, a dairy farm that doesn't say very few trees on farm, what would be your take home in terms of where and how to start?
Well, just start slowly. Pick out a critical area that is very difficult to farm in a dairy sense, and there's not many farms that haven't got a rough corner somewhere. Start there on a small scale and see how you like it.
Well, thanks so much, Brent and Hamish, for taking the time to share with us what you learned over decades of experience. It's certainly been a privilege to visit your farm and for you to take the time to show me around. And thank you all for joining and for the questions. It's been a really good discussion. We are creating a website within the Bioeconomy Science Institute where there's going to be links to some of the stories and a little bit of a resource hub. And over the last 3 years, I think it's been, I've had the privilege to be able to visit about 35 farmers from Northland through to Southland, all of them really good farmers, and just amazed and learning from the different ways that they're integrating trees on farm. So that's getting towards publication. That'll be out later this year, and hopefully that will be a really useful resource for you as well. So bye for now, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thanks again, Brent and Hamish. It's been really good hearing from you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, right.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining in.
Thanks, right. Bye.